Good afternoon. I'm Simon Sporter, and welcome to the latest event of the tennis volunteer and paddle community. This afternoon, we've got Steve Yardley, LTA Padel Manager. Welcome, Steve.
Hi there, Simon.
And Sophie Curthoys, who is in the property team at the LTA, who helps to process, support, and grant loan funding. Shouldn't have said grant, really. Meant loan funding, obviously. So welcome, Sophie.
Hi there.
So what we're going to do this afternoon is a little introduction. So let's kick it off, Steve, with how did you get involved with the LTA? What's your the basis of how you got there, and tell us a bit about your background.
Oh, okay, thanks, Simon. So I've always been heavily involved in tennis, actually, from a young age. Played tennis since the age of 4 or 5. Went to university and did tennis, and then subsequently, when I left university, I fell into the kind of the coaching world, and I coached in Wiltshire at Delta Tennis Centre, and I coached for 15, 20 years, and then fast forward 15, 20 years worth of coaching. COVID came in 2020, 2021, and the tennis centre where I was working at, it shut down, as everything shut down during COVID. And it gave me a time to kind of reflect on kind of where I was in my career, where I was in my life, maybe what I wanted to do moving forward. And subsequently, out of nowhere, a paddle operator decided to build a paddle venue in a golf course, which was 3 miles from my home. And with it being like a canopy, so it's, I suppose, outdoor kind of venue, it allowed me to carry on working through kind of that COVID period, when my centre was shut down. So I jumped straight into the paddle world in the deep end, having never really sort of played it before, and have sort of had 1 or 2 games, absolutely fell in love with it, and jumped into the paddle world in 2020 with a company called Paddle for All. I did a year or two with Paddle for All, and then left Paddle for All and went to work for Tennis Wales in coach education. So sort of looked after their coach education and development for a couple of years. And then fast forward another couple of years, this role within the LTA for LTA Padel Manager kind of presented itself. And obviously I'd been heavily immersed in kind of coach education with paddle. I'd been playing every day, I'd been coaching every other day. I was quite heavily immersed with the junior stuff. And so I was at the front of the kind of journey, I suppose, of paddle in the UK. And so when this kind of role presented itself, I sort of jumped at it with both hands, and here I am today on this call.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Sophie, why don't you introduce yourself as well now?
Hi, so my name's Sophie and I'm in the property team at the LTA. I've been in sort of this role for about 5 years or so, really looking after the LTA's loan scheme and all of the historic loans that we have on our books. And also, as well as that, we do provide advice and guidance as a team on capital investments, even if we're not investing in them. So providing that guidance and support. Sort of prior to that, I've been at the LTA for a number of years in a number of roles. And also I was at Sport England for about 8 years working in their major projects team. So investing in facilities sort of largely linked to the London Olympic Games. So mostly been in kind of capital development in my career.
Thank you, Sophie. I think somebody may not be on mute. I can't spot who it is. If you can just check you're all on mute, that would be great. Most people I can see are. Okay, so Steve, could you give us a little summary, please, of where we're at with paddle right now? Sort of where's the LTA with it? How many courts have we got? How many players have we got in the country? What's happening in Scotland and Wales? And even if you know what's happening in Northern Ireland, albeit not directly part of the LTA, you might have a feel for whether they've got any courts. Always interesting not to know about. Tell us, where are we up to?
Yeah, so it's funny, it's very timely. We've just produced our 2025 survey. So we do a survey at the start of each year, and it's a survey that goes out to the industry, goes out to the landscape, goes out to the venues and operators, that we ask for data and insight from them, and that could be on player base, it could be on courts, it could be on everything. So we're just collating that data back. So if I give you the end of 2024 details, of which we finish on around 750-ish courts, just shy of 800 courts. We've got 250,000 players. 8% of those players are juniors, so it's a real small number, but about 4,000 junior players. and the split from kind of male to female is around 70-30%. So we can sort of see where some of the, not the barriers, but maybe where some of the opportunities may come for us in the future. But yeah, we've got a growing landscape. We anticipate, hopefully by the end of this year to be on about 1,100 courts minimum, and we hope to, have about, 325 coaches on board, 250 officials, and we hope to have a growing junior base. At the moment, we're not quite addressing that kind of issue as well as we want, but we want to move that direction forward with the work that we're doing alongside the operators in that space. In terms of Scotland and Wales, Wales actually is having a bit of a boom with their courts. They've grown significantly. Wrexham Tennis Centre's just landed 3 courts up in North Wales, and Bunyark, which is just around the corner. Well, I say just around the corner, it's still 2.5 hours. They've got some courts at the other side of North Wales. In the south of Wales, Cardiff House of Sport did have 3 indoors. They've now got 6 indoors. And that's to complement the existing ones that they've got in Cwmbran. Cwmbran have got 3 covered courts in Cwmbran, and we're anticipating that Cardiff will be the next sort of hotbed for quite a few more courts coming in the future. I'm not as close to Scotland, but they've got quite a few courts up in Glasgow and Edinburgh. And I think Sophie could probably give greater detail of which ones exactly there are in Scotland, if you've got them to hand, Sophie.
There's a bit of a mix up in Scotland, actually. There's quite a few clubs that have put 1 or 2 courts in. I think there's probably less larger scale developments in Scotland at the minute, but I know there's quite a few in the pipeline with various operators up there.
Okay, so and anything in Northern Ireland, or you're not sure, Steve?
I'm not sure Northern Ireland.
Right. Okay, so anyone who's got questions, just jump in and put your hand up. Otherwise, I've got a couple of questions I can ask in the meantime. So, Steve, obviously the majority of us here today, we are from tennis clubs, and we are volunteers in tennis and or in paddle.
Yep.
And therefore, we're particularly interested in the split of courts which are, should we say, commercial operators, then those which are in clubs but which are run or have been financed by commercial operators, and those then which have been financially independently built by clubs and venues. Do you have any information for us on that? Because that's obviously interesting.
Yeah, I mean, Sophie, you've probably got those details to hand, haven't you? But I would say we've got what you've just described there, Simon, in our paddle landscape. We've got our commercial operators that are sort of the bigger entities at the moment across the country. They're the ones that have got large warehouses, or have got big bits of land that they're throwing up 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 courts most of the time that they're indoors. We've then got the tennis clubs that have sort of started to introduce paddle along with their portfolio of offerings, and some of them are doing it themselves. Like, and a good example of that will be East Gloss, that have come through our quick access loan scheme, and they've got 3 courts, but they've just gone to planning to get 3 more, so they'll have 6. And then we've got, as you described, the tennis clubs that have got kind of a profit share model going on. And a good example of that is when I was in Wales, you had Penarth Windsor, which is a lovely outdoor tennis club that's just got 1 paddle court to the side that was a profit share with Game for Paddle, for example. So we've got those existing kind of paddle portfolios across the UK. As for a split, I don't have the exact split, but I know from
I've
our
got it
perspective,
actually, Steve.
you've got it.
Yeah, on our from our tracker. So it's around 30% in tennis clubs and CITCs, so community indoor tennis centres, around 15% in sort of non-tennis clubs, and then sort of 43% is kind of new provision. So that's either your kind of commercial paddle entities, or, like Steve mentioned, some golf clubs that have put paddle courts in. So around 30% within the tennis club infrastructure.
Okay, so Dennis, hopefully you got your answer to the question just now, where you said how many of those paddle courts are private. I've got Simon Toby. Do you want to come in and ask your question, please?
Hi, yeah. Simon Toby from a small club, Bowden Bowling and Lawn Tennis Club, up in Altrincham, Manchester. So I made some inquiries. We'll talk about paddle with Game for Paddle. We sit in a residential area. So my question is really, do you have any examples where planning looks difficult, but then people have used some noise mitigation measures to help with that process? Because I can see that there are some on the market, but whether they work and whether there's some real life examples of people solving a problem, because it is a bit noisier than tennis, and I can see that it just wouldn't make planning at the moment.
Do you want me to come in on that one?
Yes, please.
Is he
As you
just-
wish.
oh, there he is.
Whoever's expert on it.
Well, I'm not an expert. My colleague Mark is our kind of technical expert, but fundamentally it is noisier
Yeah.
than tennis, and the frequency of the ball strike, and also it's more social, so people are laughing and giggling more perhaps than you would on a sort of on a tennis court. So it kind of look, it's all very site specific.
Yeah.
Our guidance is really that you should be around 30 meters from a boundary. And anything closer than that, people are having challenges. In terms of noise attenuation, it kind of all depends around what the background noise is on your site. So some venues, tennis venues where there's housing, but then they're also close to a road, the kind of general hum of traffic and stuff creates that kind of background noise. So therefore the noise of paddle isn't significantly greater than the kind of general noise. But if you've got a very quiet area and then you suddenly add in paddle, there is a leap up in noise. So we just recommend that venues get noise surveys undertaken, and then in terms of sound attenuation walls, there are options. The main areas where the sound comes out for paddle is where you've got the fencing, and then at the back of the court when it comes out over the top. So we're potentially looking at whether you can put some glass or perspex outside of the frame of the court to try and reduce the noise. But we're looking to try and produce some more guidance on that. But fundamentally, if you're in quite a built up area and you've got neighbours very close, it is being quite challenging for clubs. And where they've put them in and it's been approved, after the event, some neighbours are like complaining through environmental health. So yeah, it is a bit of a challenge.
It's a tricky area, yeah.
Yeah,
I just wondered, yeah.
And
I've
how many courts would you be thinking of trying to achieve planning permission for?
Well, I think we've got capacity for two, maximum of two, realistically. Yeah. So
yours is a grass court club, isn't it, Simon? I've been to Bowden. I think it's
no, I think you're thinking of the bigger Bowden club. I think, Steve.
okay.
Yeah. We've got they've got grass. Yeah, but
Okay.
and they have applied for paddle. I think their initial planning permission was not back, but yeah.
So
But
Steve,
anyway, we're a smaller club. Yeah.
only because I know that area pretty well myself. Whenever I go
Yeah.
up the Bowden, I'm told that Simon's club is the friendly one of the two.
Correct. You're very well informed, Simon.
So before
Thank you. Anyway,
thank you, Simon. So just an interesting one, I asked the question of Simon because Steve, what I'm interested to know is, because obviously clubs, it's all very new, but in the same way as tennis clubs would have inter-club competitions and matches, how many courts are you recommending are required in order that a club will be able to do that going forward? Because traditionally a match might be played on 2 courts or 3 clubs, a tennis match. What are you saying? Because Simon was saying 2 courts. Is 2 courts enough, or do they need to have 3 courts?
No, I mean that's a great question, and it's one of those ones of an if of your club. If it was me and I had my club, I'd be trying to maximize the space to put more courts in to drive more usage, more participation, etc., etc. What I wouldn't be trying to do a 1 court and then trying to service the whole paddle community and trying to put match play on. We're finding that the paddle venues are very populated, occupancy and kind of penetration rates are quite high. Therefore, actually time to get, products and programs and competitions on those courts are quite tough at the moment. So, if it was me and if I could get 2 or 3 courts 100% I would be doing that. I'd be driving a greater revenue through the courts. I'd be diversifying my income streams. I'd be diversifying my offer. When we're seeing that actually, the tennis clubs that have got padel as an offering are getting a new wave of people. So it's a different participation group. It's not just your existing tennis players that are playing padel. It's a new wave of people that are coming through the doors, which is very, very interesting indeed.
Okay, so Steve, subject to having enough money to build the courts,
Yeah,
having the space to build the courts,
yeah.
having the potential interest in the area for the courts. What else can I come up with? Having the, I don't know, the lack of concern that it may take tennis players away from tennis to paddle. You would say build a minimum of 3 courts, if I've got it right.
I wouldn't ever put a number on it. I mean, it depends on the appetite of the club, and it depends on if the club are doing it themselves or if they're going into a profit share. I would recommend the clubs look into it themselves if they've got the money. And I would be trying to not squeeze is the wrong word, but I'd be trying to make sure I've got good value for my money in terms of the courts that I do put down. I wouldn't be doing this as a proof of concept to see if it works. It will work. You will fill the courts, and ultimately you'll drive a new income stream in, new participation model. You'll get a real diverse crowd playing the sport that maybe haven't come to your tennis club before.
But from a competition perspective, if they're going to play other clubs, is the LTA going to organise or suggest matches of just 4 players, so 2 courts, or is it going to be 6 players and people are going to hang around? What's the
Well, it's
plan?
doubles. So paddle's always doubles. So
Yes, yes.
you know, you could play a match on one court with 4 people, but at the moment we don't have inter-club competitions. We've got National Club League that we run locally, regionally, and then nationally, but we don't, at the current state of play, we don't have any sort of inter-club matches going on. So this is something that we will grow and learn alongside the paddle kind of community as we go.
Okay, no, all I was trying to do was try to grasp what clubs should be considering to be a little bit future-proof.
I'd be using the space in and around the courts, the space you've got. I'd be trying to put as much on that space as possible.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Louisa, do you want to come in, please? Remind everybody where you're from.
Hi, yeah, I'm from Elmwood Tennis Club in Northwest London. And I've listed about 5 questions I've got, and I'm trying to think where to start.
We've got sections, Louisa, but just like fire away, and if all my sections go, it doesn't matter.
Okay. One is we may not have space for 2 paddle courts, and if we don't, someone has suggested a singles court. Is that what? I'd love to know everybody's thoughts on that. The other is we've now spoken to a few suppliers. We're doing this. We're not interested in a contract. We want to run it ourselves, and so we're looking at people who will build this for us. And I think it boils down to the difference between a Spanish and an Italian court. And needless to say, the person who is offering us an Italian court says that it's better than Spanish. I'd love to know if anyone knows anything about that. How easy is it to get the LTA quick access loan? Should we be doing that now? Should we be waiting? I don't know what stage we do that. How do we find out what the what a realistic expected income is? And at what point do we become saturated with paddle courts and therefore not expect the income that we can expect kind of now?
Lots of good questions, Louisa.
Simon.
Go on, Steve, try and remember all those.
No, good questions. I think Sophie's best placed to answer the majority of those questions around kind of like the court service and SAPCA registration, but also in terms of like the latent demand and saturation modeling that you're talking about, Louisa. So I won't steal her thunder on that one.
That's called passing the buck, I think, Steve. So in terms of a singles paddle court, we don't really support them through our loan scheme. You probably won't make the value on it in terms of your financial return that you would on a doubles court, but I can kind of see the place for them. They're quite good for kids, and like where we where I go on holiday with my family, I've got 2 young boys, and actually we sometimes just play on the singles court because it's easier for them to kind of cover the grounds. When they get too good, I'll make them play on a full court. So look, I can kind of see the place for them if that's all you can squeeze in. And a number of places have done it where they've had 3 and then they've added one court in. So if that's the option, then it's probably not a terrible idea, but they're probably not significantly cheaper, and you probably won't drive the revenues that you may on a paddle court. In terms of what we see for revenue from paddle courts, through the investments that we make through the LTA, we don't want people to be priced out of it. So when we're making judgments on projects that come into us for funding, we look somewhere between £20 and £30 for a court hire, and it's normally at that lower end, to be honest. So we'd prefer if clubs don't, sort of price people out of it. And often what clubs will do is they'll offer a lower rate for their members, and then the pay and play rate would be slightly higher or slightly better booking rights in terms of in advance booking for members and non-members. What were your other questions? There was one around
revenue. How do we work out? So the £20 to £30. Yeah, I mean,
I tend to, so in terms of utilization for an outdoor court, most venues are seeing sort of 70% at least, and they're seeing a bit of drop off over the winter, but probably not as bad as you think. And then indoor courts, your utilization is around 90%. But for our modelling, we would look for clubs to be looking at least sort of 5 bookings a day. So when if you do put a loan into us, we would expect clubs to kind of anticipate they're going to get 4 or 5 bookings a day, in their kind of financial modelling. I think it's fairly conservative, to be honest, but it's probably a good start point.
So Sophie, if you're talking about you'll accept clubs and venues who are looking at a model of about £20 to £30 an hour, is that what you're suggesting? Because if that is the case, how do clubs look at the fact that professional and commercial operators are charging anything from £50 for an outdoor court to, at least in my area, and I'm nowhere near London, which is even more expensive, up to £100 an hour for those situations? So Louisa, for example, Whetstone, which is not so far from you in London, their indoor centre charges £100 an hour and sometimes £120 an hour. So should you, as bearing in mind tennis / paddle opened up and encouraging inclusion in more people being able to play tennis and paddle, should you be showing a bias towards clubs and venues as opposed to encouraging commercial operators? I know that's a very challenging question.
Well, no, it's fine, because these commercial entities, they operate on their own. Like they're, obviously they potentially become registered to the LTA, and we want them as part of the family. But they wouldn't be able to access funding from the LTA because they're commercial entity, which we don't fund, and also our, Tennis Opens Up and trying to encourage participation. The projects that we fund through the Tennis Foundation charity, we want them to be affordable. So we will only support schemes where it's a fair and affordable charging model that's being proposed, and as well as the kind of pay and play charge, we obviously look at affordable coaching and all of those things that sit behind it. So we can't really control what commercial entities are charging, but when we're being asked for funding, we will request, and to be fair, most clubs are not pricing people out of the market that come into us.
So the hope is that clubs and venues will come on board, build paddle courts with your support, and that will force the price down to increase participation and make it less elitist.
Yeah, I mean, I think like with paddle, it will probably start beginning to follow the similar model to tennis. So if you think about tennis, you've got the commercial ends of the market where you've got your David Lloyd clubs and those kind of higher ends commercial entities. You've got local authorities that deliver tennis sort of more at a low cost, either through indoor tennis centres where obviously there's more of a charge, but then you've got the park network and park stock of outdoor tennis courts, and then you've got the club network, and I think Padel will start to follow that mix of opportunity. I guess currently at the minute you've got a lot of excitement from the commercial entities and people viewing it as a very commercial proposition, as well as those people do also want to grow the sport, but they're obviously capitalizing on the interest on it. And we're working with lots of local authorities to create those kind of local plans for Padel, so that we can kind of control the more community element of that market as well, working with local authorities and working with clubs. So I think over time it will begin to follow, correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, but begin to follow that similar model to tennis.
Thank you, Sophie. Steve, do you want to come in before we move on?
No, I think Sophie's hit the nail on the head, and in thinking about that commercial entity world, they're very much going into these large warehouses, paying a high rate per square foot, sometimes £10, £12.50 per square foot. So they've got quite a high leasehold before business rates. So actually for us to open Padel up, and how we want to open Padel up, we're very much trying to make sure we work really closely with the local authorities and the clubs up and down the country to offer this more community user agreement kind of friendly offering, so that actually Padel can reach everyone and not, as you called it, the elitist.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Joanna.
I'll just add one point to that actually, because obviously when a commercial Padel entity wants to get planning permission, obviously you have to go to the local authority. And interestingly, we're seeing quite a lot of local authorities to say, well, okay, we'll give you planning permission, but actually you need to sign a community use agreement with us to ensure that you deliver some community aspects of it. So we've drafted a template which will start to get rolled out across our networks, that includes things like open weekends, lower cost interventions for the community, affordable opportunities, interventions around women and girls, engaging with local disability groups, just to try and influence it from that aspect as well. Okay,
thank you, Sophie. Jo Ellis, do you want to come in, please?
Yeah, hi, my name's Jo. I am the chair of Halsbury Tennis Club in Cheshire. We're a four-court outside club, and we also run a park venue as well in a neighbouring sort of village. They're all floodlight, fully floodlight. We are part in the main site of a multi-sports venue, and we're just at the start of looking at Padel now. I think it would fit very, very well where we are. There'd be lots of parties, I guess, to sort of get on board. It'd be the main community sports club. That'd be us. We're not awash with cash, so we'd be probably more interested into some sort of profit share arrangement. And I wondered if anybody had got an example of what that looked like. What was a fair sort of starting point when you start to talk to these Padel companies? Is it that they literally pay you a rent and take all the money, or is there more of a sort of more of a mixed model, and what does that look like? I suppose also wanted to know how much does it cost to build a Padel court, and is there, if you build more, are there sort of economies of scale? Sort of one of the comments I had when we talked to our local regional participation officer was about that the LTA definitely don't want to prioritise Padel over tennis. So using one of our underused court park sites would be something that they wouldn't perhaps think was appropriate. So it was just those sorts of things, but really looking about cost and model and how we take that forward.
Thank you, Jo. Who wants to answer that one? Steve, Sophie? Neither? I
don't mind. I mean, I'd be quite interested to know what, because we do see sort of some offers that Padel companies offer venues, but we don't see too many, obviously, like commercial sensitivities and stuff. But generally, the kind of principle is the Padel company will build the courts for you or on your site, and then do a profit share arrangement. And sometimes the tennis club will run the courts, and sometimes the commercial entity will run the courts. But I think our advice is, don't just go with your first offer. Seek a few quotes, or speak to a few companies just to see what they can offer.
Can you do like a part sort of contribution? Could you offer some money towards the build and they would offer, or does that not work that way?
It tends to be that they normally sort of upfront the whole cost. I mean, if you have got some partnership funding, and it is a community project, it's the sort of thing potentially to come to the LTA for, because we would support those sorts of schemes. In terms of like replacement of tennis courts, there's quite a few organisations kind of going after tennis courts at the moment as a kind of quick conversion to paddle. So that we'd rather people didn't build on tennis courts, but if it makes sense, we will approve it or give our consent to it through the planning consultation process. So say if you had eight tennis courts, 4 at your club, 4 in a park, and you wanted to convert one of the tennis courts in the park to 3 paddle with a bit of lands next to it, we're likely to support that as an option, because it obviously diversifies what you're offering and creates more kind of playing opportunities, and can kind of support the finances of the rest of the tennis operation as well. So we do have a fairly sort of pragmatic approach to it.
So Joe, I think there's quite a lot of situations where if you get a professional operator into your club or your venue, they will, I've heard, take 80%, they will give you 20%. This is not for every club and every situation, it's obviously negotiable, but along those lines, they will do everything from planning to organising. It will be a one-stop shop that just one day they'll come in and talk to you, agree something with you, and then subject to planning, you'll have your paddle courts on your site. So that they're very experienced, they're very good at what they do, but it's whether that's the correct model for you is the one that you'll only know once you actually go into a proper conversation with, as Sophie says, at least 2, possibly 3 of these operators. But I will caveat that they're obviously in it to make money. They wouldn't be doing it if they weren't confident that they're going to make money out of you and your members and the community. But that's the success of why there are now, I think Steve said just now, 700 courts in the country, which is double what there were a year ago. And it's required private investment to allow this to happen. So,
and the cost of a paddle court, roughly?
Yes.
Around 75,000. And so it's around 35k for the courts, and then the groundworks and the ring beam is around 30. And we're broadly seeing that. It did go up a little bit at one point, but it seems to be leveling out a bit. And then if you put a cover over it with a canopy structure, depending on what sort of structure you can, it's almost double the cost.
And Sophie, if you're using existing tennis court with existing good foundations in inverted commas, what price reduction would that allow?
So we would recommend that venues use the SAPCA Code of Practice for the construction of paddle courts, which requires the construction of a ring beam that sits beneath the court. So there are some companies that will come and bolt on paddle courts to existing surfaces, but we can't guarantee that they would be structurally sound. So the recommendation is, if you're going to build them, you build them with a ring beam. And there's some organisations that were sort of testing the concept a little bit of paddle by using this sort of more bolt down sort of structures outside. I think it's less of an issue inside, but outside. And actually they're doing a programme of replacing those actually and putting in a proper ring beam. So our recommendation is to kind of do it from the outset in that way. Okay. And SAPCA is a Sport and Play Contractors Association. So we would recommend, if you're looking to build a paddle court, you go to contractors that are on that site, on that website, that are member organisations, because they go through the kind of scrutiny.
Sophie, Dennis has just raised in the chat. You don't have, the LTA don't have an official court contractor, do they? You'd recommend go through SAPCA.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to come to Dennis's. Does that answer your questions now? For now, Joe, you can just put your hand up manually, then I can see. Oh, there you are. Okay, so Dennis Saunders asked a few questions here, some of which I understand, some of which, Dennis, you may have to come on board to ask. So I'll start. how many paddle courts are private? I think we've done that one. Is there a danger of a paddle bubble bursting? My club in Hayes, Kent, is small but not wealthy. So I assume he's basically doesn't want to go down in the wrong direction, then have a costly repair.
Hi, Simon. If I could just speak.
Yeah, go on, with pleasure, Dennis.
This is a tough one because, you know, there's nothing I'd like more than a couple of paddle tennis courts bringing in revenue to the bar. And, you know, we're depleted down to 20 members. We're up to about 70 or 80 now, but we need, you know, we're a 6-court club. We need about 300 members at least. But I've been offered this week 3 paddle tennis courts for 300,000 quid. And then I get an email from a company in Warrington saying, oh, we can put a paddle tennis court in for 19,000 quid, but you got to do, there's going to be about 20 grand's worth of groundwork. So that's a big difference. And, you know, what if we outlay all this money on or sign our souls to the devil with a sort of a profit share venture with someone, you know, because the local council won't fund us because we're a trust. You know, we share with Bromley Rugby Club and Hayes Cricket Club, who would use the paddle, but we could really leave ourselves exposed because, as you know, Bromley's got more tennis clubs than anywhere else on the face of the earth. It's just literally hundreds of tennis clubs in our area, in Kent, but in our area, and they're all starting to put paddle in. So we want a piece of the pie, but at the same time, I've got to balance up the risks. So and I find that's a big difference. You know, 19 grand from one contractor, 300 grand for sorry, it would have been 100 grand, you know, for a single court from another one. So I feel like it's a bit of a minefield at the moment, unless we've got money behind us.
I think that figure I gave, around 70, around that ballpark, is probably a good start point as your benchmark. I mean, when you go out to tender, it may come in slightly lower than that or slightly higher, depending on your project. But it's probably a good marker. I mean, we've had quite a few. We just funded one up in the Midlands, and that was 3 floodlit but outdoor, and it was 220 for 3. And that was with VAT actually. So somewhere around that figure would be a good sort of start point to think about in terms of a fair quote. If you're getting anything sort of random either ends, then make sure they're on the SAPCO code of practice.
Is there a quality control on courts as well? You know, like shatterproof glass and, you know, the actual playing surface? Because there's a fantastic YouTube channel this kid does. It's called Everything Paddle. I recommend anyone who wants to get involved with paddle.
Thank you, Dennis. We don't do adverts, unfortunately, Dennis, but please carry on.
Well, this guy, he goes around and he reviews every paddle tennis club in Britain.
So that kind of recommendation around that SAPCO code of the SAPCO code of practice is the kind of that is the kind of benchmark, I suppose, for being approved as a kind of good contractor. And there's at the beginning there weren't so many on the list, but lots and lots have been approved now, so there's quite a pool to fish in.
But what I would say is that the latest video this guy's done, he's done the top 10 paddle clubs in Britain, and not one is anything to do with the LTA. They're all funky warehouses with gyms, music, protein shakes. It's a fantastic all-encompassing experience for the paddle court player, and
which is great.
Quite right, it's like 100 quid an hour.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but it's
okay. So next question from Ali. Thank you, Dennis. Ali Findley. We already have a paddle court. It's transformed our revenue for the club overall in a very positive way. My question is around ratings. What do the LTA plan to do around this, similar to the World Tennis Number? I'm not talking about rankings, which I know are there via LTA comps. Instead, I mean rating people can compare to each other to match up, similar to what Platonic's ratings are doing.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it's something that's in our annual plan this year to explore, Simon. So we're in talks with a couple of companies that currently have a paddle rating kind of infrastructure, and we're going to explore that, have a bit of a deep dive into how they do it, how it operates, could it be rolled out, can it be scaled if we don't do it ourselves, because you're right, what kind of Platonic have in terms of their rating structure and system, does work, and it's something that actually we'd like to get on board with and get in front of the queue of. So we're exploring that this year. So yeah, that's very timely, that question.
That sounds great. Thank you.
So cost of playing concerns. Does the LTA have concerns over the cost of the game right now? Or do you feel that over the next 2 to 3 years, the best operators, commercial operators, will continue, others will fall out of the market who maybe their model is not sustainable, and the price will come down, allowing people other than at an elite level to be able to pay for a court?
Yeah, I think Sophie's touched on it earlier. I feel like we will have an evolving paddle market that will mature. We'll have paddle in the parks, we'll have paddle in clubs, we'll have paddle in CITCs, we'll have paddle in warehouses with the commercial entities. And I suppose once we get to that stage, the supply and demand kind of thing, the court prices will come down. At the moment, we're seeing a lot of pay and play in our paddle world. And I also feel like in a year, 2, 3, 4, 5 years' time, there'll be lots of products and programs. There'll be some schools initiatives. There'll be off peak. There'll be on peak. And I feel like we will get a mature market in time. At the moment, what we're seeing is, high court prices and split costing between 4 players because they can. But obviously, the growth of this sport is exponential, and we're getting more paddle courts day in, day out, week in, week out. And I think that will drive down the cost, but also paddle will be offered in different environments. So when we've got paddle in more clubs, paddle in parks, paddle in local authorities, I feel that community kind of price point for paddle will help. And I feel like then people have a choice, have an option, if they want to go down to, their local paddle club and pay 20 to 30 pound an hour, or if they would like to go to one that's got protein shakes and music and, as Dennis alluded to earlier. So it'll be dependent on the consumer then. So yeah, at the moment we're seeing quite a lot of high prices, but we feel like the market will mature. It will mature, and that diversification of where you can play will definitely help.
Thank you. I've got a question here, which I was asked earlier about putting up temporary courts to see what demand is like. So there are temporary courts available. What do you know about the cost of a temporary court? What should people be paying for maybe having it for a month, trying it out, seeing what it's all about? And are they safe to put up? Any thoughts on that, either of you?
Yeah, I've seen a few temporary courts up and down the country. I'll name drop now. Torquay Lawn Tennis Club had a temporary court at their venue as a proof of concept, as you said, and they actually, believe it or not, they had it as a proof of concept in their winter months, and the occupancy rates were exponential as per predicted. They've now kind of taken that temporary court away and have subsequently added paddle courts to their offering that aren't temporary courts, and they did use it at the time for a proof of concept, but I think most people are realizing now that they don't need a proof of concept. It's going to be a sport that sustains and then will be viable. But in terms of costs of a temporary court, it differs. It depends, because you can get some temporary courts that are glass. You can get some temporary courts that are perplex. You can get some temporary courts that can be rolled out in one day. Some might need a stage. So it does all depend.
Okay. Thank you. Dennis asked the second part of this question, but the first part of the question is, what impact is paddle having upon traditional tennis clubs and tennis players? And then on the heels of paddle, what impact is pickleball going to have upon paddle and potentially tennis? Either of you?
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's a good question. And like, I think Sophie's already alluded to it already, but we don't want to grow paddle to the detriment of tennis. And what we're actually seeing is participation trends, whether it be annually, monthly, weekly, they're actually on the incline for tennis. So tennis is actually a growing sport. And subsequently, we've invested quite a lot of money through the DCMS recently in the Parks project to help grow and sustain that kind of growth. as well as paddle. So we've invested £6 million, circa £6 million into paddle, 4.5 of which has been via the quick access loan schemes into 80 odd courts, around 40 odd venues. So yeah, we're growing both sports simultaneously, and actually we're seeing the trends rise in both sports. There's not one going up and one going down. It's both. And
pickleball, the impact upon pickleball?
Yeah, pickleball I haven't got too much data on, believe it or not. So, I think what's happening with tennis clubs is, and I speak from a personal point of view here. I had a tennis club in Swindon that shut down because it just had one product. It was just tennis, and we couldn't, well, that centre couldn't sustain because it only had one kind of income stream coming in. And I think what we're seeing now is, with good programming and with good venues, they're diversifying their income by having multiple income streams. And I feel like if clubs can have a diverse offer, they can sustain, pickleball, paddle, tennis, and it just alleviates that pinch point of having to just survive on your own. But I don't have any data or insight on pickleball, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you, Steve. And where should clubs and venues go to, either Steve or Sophie, if they have that very steep initial learning curve? So I'm sure there's the toolkit, but who can they speak to? Do they just need to contact customer services, or can they actually speak to somebody? Where are we at on paddle? Because tennis is obviously rather more developed than paddle, and people need a lot more support at this point, at this early stage. Where do they go?
That's a fab question. So we've got they used to be called a regional team, but they're an area team now. And we've got 5 heads of delivery. We've got, London and South East, we've got Central and East, we've got North and Midlands West, North and Midlands East, and also South and Southwest. And they're all headed up by heads of delivery. Within the heads of delivery, they've got a team underneath them, and there's 29 delivery managers that work locally. Sometimes they're working within a city, sometimes they're working within a county, but they're working within their area. They're your first point of call if you've got anything, any sort of question to do with tennis or paddle, or anything to do with, the infrastructure or growth of the sport, or they're your first port of call. They will then raise that centrally if they need further support with either Sophie or myself. In terms of the existing landscape,
Steve, how do they contact those people? Because that's not always clear from a tennis perspective, let alone now paddle.
Yeah, so that's on the website. So their details are on the website locally. So it's on our LTA website, and we will have our own paddle website subsequently mid-April, sort of late April, and that'll be on there as well. So they're your initial contact. If you've got anything kind of servicey kind of questions, that can be done via our CST team, so our customer support team. And then in terms of our existing landscape, so our kind of our paddle operators now, what I'm doing quarterly is I'm running a national paddle operators forum quarterly, and that allows engagement. That's done face to face, but it's also done remotely. So that's inviting people to have open and honest conversations about the growth of the sport, share some learnings, gives us a chance to educate in certain areas. And we're trying to put that on, like I said, face to face and remotely, so that we're servicing the existing landscape, but also we're servicing the kind of emerging landscape as well.
And you'll let us know about those?
Yeah, well, the next one's on the 19th of March, coming up.
Right. Okay. So if you can send me details of that, I can then circulate. That would be great.
It would be for our existing kind of national paddle operators. So they're the ones who have got paddle at the moment, who it wouldn't be the ones who are looking to get paddle, if that makes sense.
So when you say a paddle operator, are you talking about a club, or are you talking about a commercial operator when you say that now?
It can be both. So like, for example, East Gloss are on that are in that forum, and then we've also got commercial entities. So we're getting our ones who are addressing our most participation together in a room, and we're having subject headers. So the first one is around competition and why competition can be healthy for your venue, and how you can diversify your income, and why it's good for your players. Our second conversation is around products and programs, especially around the women's and girls situation. Our third one is going to be delivered with a safeguarding topic about how you can have a safe place to play at your venue. And each time there's just a different topic, a different theme that we can have open conversations around.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Before I forget, I'm going to come to you, Joe, in a second, but we had somebody called Brian, and we've answered most of his question, but I think this is just a sort of hopefully a yes, that state school children will have the opportunity of being able to play paddle in the short to medium term because of some of the initiatives you're coming up with as the LTA.
Yeah, exactly that. So I think Sophie mentioned it earlier. We're going when people are applying for courts, we're putting something called a community service agreement together, along with the local authorities, which will tackle kind of the barriers that might present itself. So that might be around adaptive paddle, so disability paddle. That might be around women's and girls. That might be around kids playing sport. That might be around families of a lower income. So they will have to adhere to these community service agreements if they're successful with their planning.
Okay, thank you. Joe, you want to come back in, I believe.
I was just very quickly to ask about park sites, really. Well, I saw some paddle courts the other night. There seemed to be lots of glass/perspex. Is there an adjustment to be made if they're in park sites? Do you have a problem with vandalism, or have you not really experienced many park sites yet?
So there are a few in parks. I mean, what tends to happen is that so you'd have your paddle court or number of paddle courts, and then like fencing around the complete sort of perimeter of those, and then a gate access system on that gate, and that works quite well. So you obviously go and pay, and then you get access to the courts. We are looking at options around, instead of using glass, whether you use like a perspex type structure within parks. And then also in Spain and Madrid, sort of in some of their parks, they have like breeze courts. So and they're like rendered walls, so they're just a slightly different structure. So we're working with a few local authorities to just sort of trial potentially some of these as alternative solutions. Fundamentally, that is glass. And we're doing some work with Manchester City Council, and they're looking at Wythenshawe Park, and they're like, oh, it's glass. I'm like, okay, let's see if we can find an alternative solution. Or
because we run the park site with a gate access scheme. We have enough problems with that, just with the gate access teams that have been blocked open and bits and pieces, and it's pretty bulletproof. But that was our main concern about putting it on the park site.
So does anyone else have any questions? We've got quite a few people online here. This is your chance to ask Sophie and Steve before we finish.
Simon, it's Clive. Steve, you just mentioned about state schools there. People may be aware of obviously the Jason Mountford initiative. Is that something local to Manchester, or is that a national?
No, it's a great initiative. So Jason's someone who fell in love with the sport a couple of years ago, and sort of come from an area of Manchester, Moss Side, that's maybe not so affluent, and didn't have the opportunities to play as many sports as he would like to due to cost. So actually he's come up with this initiative himself. He's subsequently running these running it nationally, but basing it around where he's got gigs, Clive. So if he's got a gig in Coventry, he will be looking to reach out to the local Coventry schools. Now, what we're doing alongside him is we're supporting him. So we're making sure he's going into registered venues. We're making sure we're having conversation with the operators so that when the kids finish their session with Jason, that they've got another opportunity, a further opportunity to play. So that might be a voucher to come back and play. It might be, in Manchester, we gave rackets and balls to the children that attended, as well as an hour and a half's court time each. So we're working alongside Jason and the operators to make sure not only does he attract people into paddle, but they've got an opportunity to retain people within paddle. So he is doing it nationally, and he's working in collaboration with ourselves.
Okay, thanks.
Steve, I just had a question in with reference to coaching. So there are, I think you said, about 300 paddle coaches across the country at the moment. Was that the figure you gave earlier?
No, it's just shy. It's about 170.
Okay,
but we're looking to get to around 300, 350 by the end of this year.
So there is an understanding that the LTA has obviously its paddle qualifications, but a commercial operator stroke even a tennis operator who's now got paddle courts, could have anybody coaching paddle, whether or not they've got a qualification or not. You don't currently have control over that. Is that the case, or is there a standard of qualification that is mandatory?
No, we very much mirror what happens in tennis. So we do recognise qualifications from outside the UK, and we call them the non-standard entry point qualification kind of structure. That is, I could have a Spanish RPT or a Paddle MBA or Hello Paddle, or something from France, for example, or Portugal, and we recognise the qualification, but it doesn't fit within our pathway. So what we do is we get them to send it in to us, and we give them we call it a level 0, but ultimately what we do want those coaches to be is accredited, and that means they've got enhanced DBS, first aid, and safeguarding. They're the 3 things that we want. And then what we're saying to the venues is exactly the same as what we say in tennis. Is it's the venue's attitude to risk around the deployment guidelines. So if I use myself as an example, Simon, I was someone that had 20 years worth of tennis coaching that went into paddle in 2020. This is before the LTA had a paddle qualification. And actually, the venue said he's got his accreditation, so we know he's low risk. And actually, he's got 20 years worth of tennis coaching qualification. Actually, we deem him as low risk, and I was competent enough and confident enough to coach paddle. So we're seeing a lot of tennis coaches do that. We would then still advise the tennis coaches that we recommend that they do the paddle qualification, because it is a different sport. But in terms of the how to coach, they'll be pretty much switched on. They just won't know the what to coach just yet. So no, we wouldn't be recommending any registered venue, or any venue indeed, to have someone on their site coaching if they haven't got any qualification or any coach accreditation whatsoever. So but what we are seeing is some tennis coaches who haven't done the paddle qualification yet. However, they maybe have done an intro to paddle CPD, which isn't a level 1, but it's a CPD that almost gives them a flavour of what paddle is. And we're saying that they can be deemed competent and confident enough to deliver some paddle sessions at the venue in the interim until they've done their qualification. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that was all good. Any further questions before we wrap up? Okay, so thank you very much, Steve, for coming along today. Thank you very much, Sophie, for all of your input and your knowledge as well. Thank you, all of you, for coming along. If you have any questions after this event, first of all, you get a copy of the video. I'll send that on to you. But also, I will pass on any questions that you have once you've sort of looked at the video again, thought about it all. I will pass them on to Steve and Sophie and try and get some answers. But there are also all these people out in the field who will be able to help you. Thank you very much for joining us today. And I'm going to finish the recording now.
Thanks, everyone.